And when you understand that laws change, cultures even evolve, traditions change, universal truth will always remain the same. So we have to be careful of blindly celebrating traditions without understanding its foundation. A really good analogy I use for this is this young girl who wanted to ask her mom, "Mom, why do you always cut the edges of the roast off before you put it in the freezer?" She said, "Oh, child, I don't know. My mom always did it, so I just did it." So she went to go ask her grandmother, "Grandma, why do you always cut the edges off of the roast before you put it in the freezer?" "Oh, child, I don't know. My mama always did it, so I just did it too." So she was lucky enough to even be around her great-grandmother. And she went and asked her, "Gee, Mama, why do you always cut the edges of the roast off before you put it in the freezer?" She said, "Oh, child, back then, the freezers were so small that that's the only way we could get it in the freezer. 3 generations later, we're still doing it without understanding." You've got to be able to deconstruct our knowledge and begin to create new ways of being. So as we're changing, understand that when you were 15 years old, you realize what was good for you at 15 was not good for you at 20. Think about how differently we change, and all of you shift at least every 5 to 7 years in your thinking. So what's good for you at 20 is not good for you at 30. And what's good for you at 30 is not good for you at 40. And nowadays, I'm hearing even 50 is the new 30. So it just keeps going on and on. So expect to change. I'm almost done here. What I want you to do is, when you understand this conflict and how to manage that conflict, understanding that it's good. Because if you don't have that conflict, then things like war, poverty, which we're having, Holocaust, and slavery happens. If you don't believe me, ask survivors of the Holocaust, because they're taught to remember. When we fear things and we legislate based off of those differences, slavery and Holocausts occur. Ask our Native American brothers and sisters. And while I advocate for all of you all to go as far as you can in your educational career, understand that your degree is not your end goal. What did she say? It is just the beginning. It's where the real work begins, because once you get that degree, people listen to you differently. Now your voice will be heard differently, which means you have a responsibility to impact and to imprint on other people. So while you're doing this, look for what's not being said and say it. Look for what's not being done and do it. When we journey through the history, you have to remember not just the good part of it, but the difficult part again, because again, that's where we find our growth. So while you're in grad school, take the opportunity to find different sources and create your own truth, so that we become producers of information and no longer consumers of education that somebody else is feeding us. Know that things are always shifting. Things are never, ever really stagnant. They are either beginning, shifting, or fading. And now is a time for social movement. So we have to make social connections. We have to network and work with people in the community. Work with people who don't necessarily look like us. And once we begin to work with other people and unlearn what we learned about them, and being able to assess how we want to feel about them, we realize that it's a totally different story. When I look out here, I have hope for our future. I think as a scholar, I think is our future leader, in our own way. I think that we can be a forward-thinking nation understanding that what fairness and equality really means for all of us. And I think that that is the goal of our common culture in the future. When we can look at soldiers, who go out and die for a country because they have some kind of love and appreciation about that country. Certainly, if we can do that, we can have a complicated conversation about our own stuff right here in that same country. And when you do that, you'll know that as a scholar, you have a duty to speak up. You have a duty to interrupt oppression, a duty to change the world one conversation at a time. And when you do that, you will find that your greatest accomplishment is being you in a world that is constantly trying to make you into something else that you're not. Thank you very much.